What's up guys, Asian here with our first gear video of the Harrowstorm patch, and today we're going to be going over Magicka DPS gear. So Harrowstorm is a dungeon DLC, which means we do happen to get 2 new monster helms and 2 new light armor sets. One of these monster helms might actually be fairly useful, and one of the light armor sets also ended up making the cut to be included in this video as a potentially good set to hold on to just based off of the bonuses that it provides. However, there are a couple of caveats, and we will be going over those as we go through the list of gear that you should pick up as a Magicka DPS. Now, those guys who are new to the channel, this particular video is just taking a look at gear and anything else that is pretty generic across all Magicka DPS. So we'll be going over things like CP points, as well as what food, what potions, things like that, but we will not be going over any sort of rotations or skill bars. Those are reserved for the class-specific videos that will be coming up later on this week. So let's go ahead and get started here. So for those guys who are familiar with these types of videos, I'll first be starting with what is arguably going to be the best setup for single target DPS, and then we'll go over some other sets that you might want to run, and we'll go through all of the 3 different types of sets. So we have dungeon sets, overland sets, and trial sets. So for Monster Helm, Zaan is still going to be the strongest Monster Helm if you are taking a look at single target damage here. This does come from a DLC dungeon. This does come from, I believe, Scalecaller Peak, so you will need to have access to that dungeon if you're going to get this set here. We will be going over some alternative Monster Helm sets to run if you don't have access to the DLCs, or if you aren't able to consistently proc Zaan. Our body set is Mother's Sorrow. This is going to be one of the most consistent sets in the game, mainly because spell crit and crit damage are fairly important stats for DPS. So we just want to make sure to hold on to a set of Mother's Sorrow here. Now, while it is a static bonus and ideally you want it as the body set, you can also run this as a front bar set depending on what your second set is. Our second set is Perfected Siroria, so this does come from Cloudrest, so you do need to have access to Somerset in order to farm for this set here. The perfect version of this set does come from the veteran version of the trial, and the various pieces do come from various sort of setups of the trial. So +1 will give you an armor piece, +2 will give you purple jewelry, and then +3 will give you gold jewelry. All 3 of them will drop the perfected weapons, so just keep that in mind. If as you're farming for this set, you will need to potentially run +2 or +3 if you want to run the jewelry like I have here. For weapon, we have an Inferno Staff on the front bar, and we are going with Siroria here, so there are a couple of sets that are going to be better suited as a front bar set because of the nature of their 5-piece. So for example, Siroria is arguably considered a proc set, so you are able to wear this on the front bar, so you don't necessarily need to have it active on both bars. In our back bar, we have the Maelstrom Inferno Staff. This is going to be the strongest Maelstrom staff that you can run. I've already talked about running either Lightning or Frost Staff, but the Inferno is going to give you the highest amount of damage. Weapon traits and enchants, our Maelstrom Staff is infused with the weapon damage enchant, and for the front bar Inferno Staff, you can go with either Precise or infused with a flame damage enchant. Precise is going to be a little bit stronger as your DPS gets higher. For Necromancers, you might also want to consider Nirnhoned, just because you will have a little bit higher spell crit and execute compared to other classes because of your class passives. For jewelry, all 3 of your enchants should be spell damage. Now, I do have the base trait here, which is Arcane, and that's perfectly fine to use, but you can also run 2 other traits for your jewelry sets. So you can either run Infused or Bloodthirsty. Bloodthirsty is arguably going to give you the best single target damage. Infused is going to be pretty close, and it is going to be a little bit more useful than Bloodthirsty in certain scenarios. So that'll be covered in a separate video once all the build videos are completed here. And then finally for armor, we have all Divines with all max Magicka enchants. We are running 5-1-1, so that means 5 light armor, 1 medium armor, and 1 heavy armor. So we have a medium shoulders and heavy helm here. So that gives us our 5 light armor pieces to get all of our light armor passives, and then we have a medium piece and a heavy piece in order to make use of our Undaunted passives. Now, in terms of other sets that you might want to consider running, we'll start off first with dungeon sets. There are a few dungeon sets here that are going to be pretty useful. You're definitely going to want to try to get them. Burning Spellweave is a classic set that comes from City of Ash, so this is a base game set. It is a proc set, and it does proc off of flame damage, so just keep that in mind. Burning Spellweave is going to be a little bit more useful if you deal more flame damage. It also does have a limited uptime. It is up for 8 seconds on a 12-second cooldown, so you can only have an uptime max uptime of 66%, so that does limit you a little bit here in terms of the maximum effectiveness of Burning Spellweave, but it's still a pretty strong set to hold on to. The next set that I'm going to talk about is going to be Scathing Mage. This pretty much falls exactly in line with Burning Spellweave in terms of potential damage output. This does come from Imperial City Prison, so you will need to farm for it there. And it also procs only off of direct damage, so a little bit more generic in terms of proc condition, but it is still direct damage. So if you are running a dot heavy build, for example, Scathing Mage won't proc nearly as much. So just be mindful of that if you do want to get Scathing Mage. The next set is going to be Draugrkin's Grip. So this set has pretty bad 2, 3, and 4-piece bonuses, but the 5-piece bonus is actually pretty strong and makes up for the weakness, particularly of the 3 and 4-piece bonus. So again, a proc set, so you can wear this on the front bar, and it procs off of direct damage, so kind of the same limitations as Scathing Mage here. And it is one of the few sources of just flat extra damage in the game right now, the only other one being a Stone Giant from a stamina DK, that stagger debuff. So this can be very strong, especially if you have a lot of dots ticking, because each tick of your dot does inherit that additional extra damage that it provides. So it can be fairly strong. It also gives you spell pen and Magicka regen, so it gives you a little bit of sustain, and also allows you to use a little bit different CP setup because you do have that additional spell penetration there. So that's pretty much it for dungeon sets. Now let's go over Overland sets, and this does also include crafted sets as well. Mother's Sorrow is an Overland set. It comes from Deshaan, so you can farm it or pick it up from guild traders. Spinners is pretty useful, not just for PvP, but also for PvE as well, for trash fights where you might need additional spell penetration. Not as strong as the stamina version of the same set here, which gives physical penetration, mainly because Magicka DPS, generally speaking, have higher spell pen than stamina DPS have physical pen. But still a potentially good set to hold on to for trash fights. Another set here, where is it, is Necropotence, which is useful for classes that have pets, mainly Wardens and Sorcerers. You could arguably use it on a Necromancer, but it's a little bit more finicky on a Necromancer, so I personally don't recommend doing so. It's not going to be quite as strong as Mother's Sorrow, but it's still a potential option here. It's also a base game set from Rivenspire, so pretty easy to obtain as well. And that's pretty much it for Overland sets. Now in terms of craftable sets here, there are a handful of craftable sets that are potentially useful here. The first one is going to be, let's see if we can find it, Law of Julianus, which comes from Hrothgar. So these are all crafted, so you can craft these yourself. This is a 6-trait set, so you will need to know 6 traits of the RMPs that you want to craft here. But if you can't craft it, then you can just buy it off guild traders or get somebody else to craft it for you and then trade it to you instead. This just adds just raw spell damage, so it's a flat bonus, so ideally you have this as a body set. Next we have Mechanical Acuity, which is another 6-trait set, and this comes from Clockwork City. So the 5-piece is fairly strong. It's very good for burst damage, but for longer fights it tends to even out a little bit more and ends up losing out to some other sets that we've covered here, like Mother's Sorrow. But it's still a pretty strong set here, especially because it's crafted, and because it's a proc, you can have this on the front bar as well. New Moon Acolyte is a 9-trait set, so fairly hard to get to craft yourself, so you might be better off buying this off guild traders or seeing if you can find a master craftsman to craft it for you. This adds a bunch of different traits, so you get the crit, you get damage as well as penetration, and your 5-piece adds a bunch of spell damage, but also increases the cost of your active abilities. And just keep that in mind here, that your sustain will take a hit if you're running New Moon Acolyte, but you get a really large boost in damage. This is a very popular set for trash pulls because it gives you that additional spell pen, plus it gives you a massive boost to spell damage as well. It's often paired with the set Perfected False God's Devotion in order to kind of offset that increase in cost. So those are some of the stronger crafted sets here. And finally, we have the trial sets. So starting off from the top here, not much here. Master Architect can be useful for specifically Wardens, Templars, and a Nightbleed because you have low cost ultimates, so you're able to make the most use out of Master Architect. So if you are in a situation where you might need to get Major Slayer out to other people, and you are on one of those three classes, just keep that in mind that Master Architect might be a set that you're going to be asked to run. This comes from the Hall's Fabrication trial, so you will need to have access to Vvardenfell to grab this set. Well, we talked about Siroria, and then the other set is going to be False God's Devotion, which comes from Sunspire trial. This is a very stat-loaded set here, so you can see it gives us 4 total armor set bonuses, as along with the Minor Slayer and the unique 5-piece. So the 5-piece reduces the cost of magic abilities by 8%, which helps out our overall sustain, which can indirectly affect our DPS, because if we are finding it easier to sustain, it's easier to sustain a light attack rotation, which will give us more DPS than if we have the heavy attack here and there. So a pretty strong set here. For False Gods and Siroria, you can use the non-perfect versions here. The difference is 1 additional armor bonus on the 5-piece that's on the perfected version of these sets. But the non-perfect version is still fine to run. False Gods Devotion normal is pretty good. Mantle of Siroria, though, if you don't have access to the perfected version of Siroria, I personally would not recommend farming for just normal Siroria, just because losing that additional max Magicka bonus on the 5-piece compared to the perfect version is actually a pretty big increase in the amount of stacks you need in order for Siroria to be strong. So I personally don't recommend farming for non-perfect Siroria here. Finally, let's talk about Monster Helm sets. So one of the weaknesses of Zaan's is the fact that you need to be within 8 meters in order to get it to proc, and it's also only single target. So in situations where you will be farther than 8 meters away, or you need AoE damage, you will want to run a different Monster Helm set. So the first set is going to be Grothdarr. This is a base game set from Vault of Madness. This is an AoE version of Zaan, I like to call it. So it deals a little bit less single target damage, but because it creates a very wide pool, it does give you a lot more cleave damage. Now this pool only has a radius of 8 meters, so pretty limited in range. It's pretty much the same range as Zaan, so just keep that in mind that Grothdarr will only be able to be used if you're able to maintain that 8-meter distance between you and whatever it is that you are wanting to kill. Now, Iceheart was nerfed in Harrowstorm, but still remains a fairly decent set here in terms of a balance between survivability and damage. That 1-piece additional spell crit does give it a little bit of an edge over other Monster Helm sets that give you max Magicka. And it also provides a little bit of additional shield as well when you deal critical damage. So pretty nice for progression style guilds where you want a nice balance between damage and survivability. Ilambris is situationally useful if you are able to deal both flame and shock damage. So for example, on a Necromancer or some Sorc builds, you can run Ilambris. Now one of the downsides of Ilambris is that it is a static proc, so basically what that means is the proc that occurs, stays within that 4-meter radius and does not move with the boss. So if the boss happens to move out of the proc damage, you will lose that damage. So just keep that in mind with Ilambris. It's not going to be very useful for boss fights where the boss or whatever it is that you're hitting tends to move around a lot. The next set is going to be Slimecraw, which is useful if your healers are not good at giving you Minor Berserk. Once you get about 40 to 45% Minor Berserk uptime, then Slimecraw becomes weaker. But if your Minor Berserk uptime is less than that, so less than 45 to 40%, then Slimecraw is going to be stronger. Next, we have... where is it? It's probably... here it is. The last Monster Helm set is going to be Kjalnar's Nightmare. So this is a new Monster Helm set from Unhallowed Grave, so you need to have access to Harrowstorm to get this set here. So it basically applies a stack of bone to your enemy whenever you deal damage with a light attack, 1 stack every second. Once you get 5 stacks, a skeletal hand will attack your enemy after 1 second, which either stuns them for 3 seconds or deals quite a bit of magic damage if they can't be stunned. So if you're in a trash pack, Kjalnar is not going to be very strong because it's just going to stun them and not deal any damage. But bosses and elite mobs cannot be stunned, so you'll always be able to deal the damage that way. So Kjalnar's is pretty good for ranged Magicka DPS. If you and don't want to wear the alternative, which is 2 one-piece crit sets. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's go ahead and take a look at Slimecraw here. The Mars Helm sets have a one-piece bonus here. So Slimecraw, for example, gives a spell crit and weapon crit on the one piece. So 2 one-piece crit sets would basically be like wearing one-piece Slimecraw and then one-piece Iceheart, because both of them have spell crit as their one-piece bonus. That is going to give you quite a bit of additional DPS actually, because of the emphasis on spell crit and crit damage on this patch. So definitely one option to consider as a ranged DPS. So it's either going to be Kjalnar's or wearing 2 one-piece crit sets. So that pretty much covers it for all the different armor pieces, and you'll find all of them listed down below in the description, along with whether you want to use them as a body set or a front bar set. So as a reminder, your body set, generally speaking, is going to be sets that you want the effect active on both bars. These are generally going to be things like static bonuses like Mother's Sorrow or Julianos, but they can also include proc sets as well. So any set that is a front bar set can also be a body set as well. So just wanted to clear up that distinction there. Moving on now to more generic Magicka DPS things. So in our character sheet, we have 64 points into Magicka here. We don't need any points into health. Most builds will be running blue food, so that gives us more than enough health to do vet trials when you combine it with things like Ebon and Minor Toughness. If you want some additional survivability, by all means, go ahead and shift some points out of Magicka and into health, but it's not absolutely necessary. For our Mundus Stone, we're going with the Shadow. You can also go with the Thief if you would like. The DPS difference between the two is going to be fairly small, but generally speaking, the Shadow is going to end up winning out. Now, in terms of food, I have ice cream here, and that's just for parse purposes. In reality, you will have several options when it comes to food. Generally speaking, blue food is going to be pretty decent here, so this just gives you max health and max Magicka. But you do have several options here. So the blue food here doesn't give you any additional sustain bonuses. However, there are a couple of foods that do give you sustain bonuses. The first one being Witchmother's Potent Brew. So that gives you both Magicka and health. Not as much as blue food, because you are also gaining some Magicka regen as well. A slightly stronger version of Witchmother's Potent Brew is going to be Artaeum Takeaway Broth. This gives you a little bit more health, or not Artaeum Takeaway Broth, Clockwork Citrus Fillet. So you get a little bit more health and a little bit more Magicka, and you get a little bit more Magicka regen, but these also end up costing more because this is gold food, so it does use Perfect Row. So if you need to sustain, use Clockwork or Witchmother's, but if sustain's not an issue because you have a lot of good support, then run blue food instead. Now there is another purple food that's a little bit stronger than your standard blue food, and that's Artaeum Pickled Fishbowl. That actually gives you a little bit more health and Magicka, but it is more expensive because it does use clam gall. Just keep that in mind. This is technically the strongest food, but it's a lot more expensive to use than just running plain old blue food, so you can kind of pick whichever one you want. If you really want to min-max, then go for Artaeum. Otherwise, just stick with your standard base game blue food. Going over champion points, this CP setup will generally serve you well across all different classes. There might be a few classes where you're going to want to shift some CP points around in the blue trees specifically. I'm thinking particularly for Dragonites and Necromancers, because they don't use quite as many, or just say Dragonites don't use quite as many direct damage hits. They have you might want to put a little bit more into Thaumaturge, and then Necromancers have additional penetration through their class passives, so you don't need any points into Spell Erosion as a Necromancer. But starting with green CPs, we have 100 into Arcanist and 5 into Tenacity. Then we have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. The only really important thing is to get 100 into Arcanist. Everything else is kind of up to you here. So if you want, you can drop some points out of Tenacity if you'd like, and put them into other nodes as you see fit. For blue CPs, we have 10 Spell Erosion, 64 Elemental Expert, 66 into Elfborn, 72 Master at Arms, 21 Staff Expert, 37 into Thaumaturge. Now again, for Mag Decays, you might want to bump up Thaumaturge a little bit more and take some out of Staff Expert or Master at Arms. And then for Necromancers, just take all your points out of Spell Erosion and place them elsewhere. Just make sure you're hitting those jump points. Finally, our red CPs. So this is optimized around just sort of generic content. So if you want to optimize for any specific trial, you will need to shift red CP points around in order to maximize your mitigation across the damage you'll face in that particular trial. But for a generic red CP setup, we have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. And so that pretty much covers everything that you need to know about Magicka DPS in terms of gear, as well as just generic Magicka DPS things you want to keep in mind here. So again, there is going to be a list down below in the description of all the sets I covered, along with whether they are a body set or a front bar set. And there will also be links in the description below to the various class builds as they start coming out throughout the weeks, the next 2 weeks here. So if you are interested in continuing on and taking a look at a specific class, their rotation, and their skill bar setups, make sure to check the description below for a link to that specific build. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer all of them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.